Hello everyone, welcome to yet another day in this, the Clown Decade, the decade where things are only going to get worse before they get better. And once again, it's another video where I'm going to have to tell you that indeed things are getting worse. So what is getting worse? Well, I'm going to let Robert Jenrick be the driver of this particular story. Take it away, Robert Jenrick.
Turning to the new sentencing guidelines that's been published alongside this statement, which will make a custodial sentence less likely for, and I quote, ethnic minorities, cultural minorities, and faith minority communities. Why is the Justice Secretary enshrining this double standard, this two-tier approach to sentencing?
Now, careful what you say here, Mr. Jenrick, because the Home Office's Rapid Analytic Sprint, which actually, after an FOI, or Freedom of Information, request was sent to the Home Office, they found that basically there is too much confidential information in the Rapid Analytics Sprint for it to go public, so instead it was leaked. And the leaked document claims that fears over two-tier policing are an extreme right-wing narrative. So careful what you say. Anyway, Lord Chancellor of the Secretary of State, Shabana Mahmood, had quite the instant reply to Mr. Jenrick.
And then let me just say finally, as somebody who's of an ethnic minority background myself, I do not stand for any differential treatment before the law for anyone of any kind, and there will never be a two-tier sentencing approach under my watch or under this Labour government.
Well, Robert Jenrick on Twitter had a reply to that. Under two-tier care, that's exactly what is happening, though. It's outrageous. This would be enshrined an anti-white and anti-Christian bias in our criminal justice system, and as you can see in the screenshot, a pre-sentencing report will normally be considered necessary if the offender belongs to one or more of the following cohorts. And some may or may not be reasonable, such as it's your first custodial sentence, or you're a pregnant or postnatal woman. That could make sense for avoiding jail time, obviously for the good of the child. Or there are people, obviously, who depend on you. Some of that may make some sense. Those that definitely don't make sense: if you are female, or if you are from an ethnic minority, cultural minority, and or faith minority community. In other words, if you are a straight white male, the sentencing guidelines say that you will not necessarily be entitled to a pre-sentence report, which effectively is a report that is written and can be pivotal in helping the court decide exactly what the sentencing should be. And effectively they are written to help custodial sentences be reduced or be changed to a suspended sentence, say. So this is a pretty direct two-tier justice system where if you are convicted of a crime, when it comes to sentencing, you have a direct advantage, directly stated in the sentencing guidelines, that if you are some sort of minority, or a woman, because women aren't minorities, then you have a direct advantage in having justice served upon you with a much lighter hand. Anyway, obviously the Conservative Party account also reported on this, but Reform UK handily pointed out that the guidelines were actually first published in 2023. It's typical of the Tories, who are just as bad as Labour. They can't be trusted. And yes, I actually decided to do a bit more digging into all this. How did it come about that we have this direct postmodern neo-Marxism in our sentencing guidelines when pretty much everyone has had the rhetoric of, oh, actually, let's not have this woke stuff within our guidelines. Everyone's trying to avoid the whole idea of being a two-tier justice system, despite the fact we've lived under a two-tier justice system for probably a decade at this point, because everyone went a bit mad after the whole Stephen Lawrence case, which was a tragedy and should not have happened. However, clearly there has been a remarkable overcorrection, and this is going to mean that the pendulum's going to swing back, and probably in a way that a lot of these people would not like. So in looking at the background of all of this nonsense, I came across this pre-sentencing reports review by Gwen Robinson, which, as you can see, was published in April 2022. And this is what has informed the new sentencing guidelines. So in this review, it had found, bear in mind this was over COVID as well, that pre-sentencing reports had gone away from written reports to oral reports for the interest of efficiency. Makes sense. However, it found that an inspection of race equality in probation, which was published the year before this report, found that the quality of PSRs prepared in case of Black, Asian and minority ethnic services users was insufficient in too many cases, and that not enough attention was paid to diversity, which screams to me that effectively, oh, it had woke reasoning. The inspectors concluded that there were poorer quality reports that failed to consider all relevant factors that run the risk of service users receiving more punitive sentences. The same report also observed considerable variance between different geographical areas in proportion of ethnic minority service users who have been sentenced without the benefit of PSRs, which again is just screaming to me that this is a nothing burger, because your geographical areas are always going to coincide with different proportions of ethnic minority service users, because ethnic minorities aren't spread across Britain to the same proportion. So taken together, the findings of recent research suggest that drive towards speed in the provision of PSRs has an advantage, particularly from the point of view of sentences. However, it may also have resulted in reduction in requests of PSRs and the reduction in quality of information available to guide decisions both at sentencing and at the start of a community service. Even assuming that this is all correct, the reaction to effectively say, oh, it's only necessary that we do a pre-sentencing report for minorities, isn't actually going to solve the issue of, well, why is the quality bad? So I decided to look into exactly how the quality of these pre-sentencing reports was bad for the BAME community. So in the Race Equality in Probation report, the experience of Black, Asian and minority ethnic probation service users and staff, published by the Inspectorate of Probation back in March 2021, had these statistics. So the important points really from here: proportion of England and Wales that's non-white, 14%, proportion of the prison population in England and Wales that is non-white as of March 2020 is 27%, and proportion of those on court-ordered probation supervision that is non-white, 16%. And it also likes to point out that the proportion of NPS staff who are non-white is 13.7%. I do love how they start bringing in the points rather than rounding it to 14% to start trying to say, oh look, they're underrepresented. They do that for a proportion of NPS staff in senior management grades who are non-white as well, 13.8%. As you can see, they start going into decimal places when they start wanting to try and make a point of underrepresentation. Doesn't matter for the rest of it. It's funny that, isn't it? You round both those numbers, they both make 14% if you were keeping it consistent, but they haven't. Should raise a few eyebrows, that. And when you go into details of stated perspectives, you can see that it's all going a bit mad. So initiatives taken by senior managers over last summer to listen to the concerns of ethnic minority staff were appreciated, though many were concerned that this interest would wane over time, as many staff believed that the initiatives were driven by global factors. Just to make that absolutely blatantly clear, because George Floyd died. Had these crises not prevailed, the issues would not have been discussed. It will therefore be important to continue to consult with ethnic minority staff and involve them in developing policy and practice through the Race Action Programme. While a reasonable majority confirmed that equal opportunities were promoted in their organisation, less than a fifth believed that there were equal opportunities in recruitment practices. Greater clarity and transparency about how recruitment and selection decisions are made were needed to improve confidence. It's nuts, isn't it? Stated preferences, they're just all conflicting with each other. Oh yeah, I actually do think that we actually do have equal opportunities and they are promoted in the organisation, but then only a fifth say that they believe that there is actually equal opportunities when it comes to being recruited. Which again, looking at the proportion of BAME people in the country to BAME people working as staff in these organisations, it's pretty much on the money when it comes to proportions. So already I feel like rejecting this outright, especially when you've got to bear in mind this was published in the same year as the Sewell report, which effectively said, yeah, Britain isn't actually a racist country and all these claims of effectively unfair treatments to minorities is complete guff. This is why this report is having to go via perspectives. You get perspectives of minority people after George Floyd happens, they're going to take advantage of that, quite frankly. Because, as I say, it doesn't make sense for most of the staff to say, yeah, I feel like I've been equally treated, and then for them in the next sentence to say, actually, I don't particularly believe that there were fair hiring practices when it came to this institution. You can't square that circle, it's impossible. Then when it comes to the perspectives of the service users for the probation service, they say many black and ethnic minority users have experienced racism, discrimination and disadvantage in their lives, and as they have progressed through the criminal justice system. Again, the Cero report largely discredits this. Many ethnic minority service users do not feel that probation staff have a good understanding of their culture, religion, heritage or experience. Some felt the probation staff were reluctant to ask about their experience, and probation staff need to find ways of of sensitively discussing these issues as part of their assessments and work with service users. About half the service users interviewed said that they had formed a good relationship with their responsible officers, and the others were neutral or less positive. Again, these are circles that can't be squared. How is it that the majority of them feel like that they experienced racism, and yet about half of them actually had a positive experience with the service, and if they didn't have it positive, it was probably neutral? And I'm assuming, when they don't go into details of the statistics here, it's about a quarter neutral, a quarter bad experience, then half good experience. If they're experiencing constant racism, you'd expect like 80% negative, but it's not happening. Again, this is while Black Lives Matter was at its peak. And so ethnic minorities, as was mentioned in this report, probably had that on mind and were taking advantage of it. This was a problem that the right wing said would happen at the time, and it turns out, wow, published reports show that, because the statistics do not actually bear out what these stated perspectives actually say. I'm not going to go into too much detail in the other paragraph, but it is interesting that it says all ethnic minority women interviewed said they would prefer a non-white responsible officer, while it was only some men who expressed this preference. And then it says that actually some of the men actually don't want the same ethnicity as them because they think they'll actually be harsher on them, revealing that actually, white people might actually be anti-racist to some extent. It's nuts, that, isn't it? Anyway, alongside this report published a summary with a take-home message section, which is mostly the take-home messages you would expect from this time period. In that everyone wants to be treated the same, well, no duh, the Cero report says that they mostly are treated the same. Most people we spoke to had experienced or witnessed racism in their lives and within the criminal justice setting, and some were tired of it and didn't see the point in talking about it because they didn't think it could change. Others found it hard to trust services because of earlier racism. Again, I don't buy this. You see the news constantly about how there's whistleblowing on racism and stuff is changed all the time, such as in this report, and as a result of this report. So I don't buy that. I think that's just a victim mentality. Most people haven't received much help from probation, instead relying on friends, family or faith groups, which again, from the larger report, didn't actually look like that was the case, because half of them said that they actually had a positive interaction with probation officers. Probation officers don't always know how to open up conversations about race, ethnicity or culture. This can look like they don't want to talk about it. They're constantly told to avoid talking about it. Matching officers and service users based on ethnicity is sometimes helpful, particularly with women, but it's not that simple. Successful relationships depend on the individuals and people wanting to support this, blah blah blah. Service users want to see more Black, Asian and minority ethnic probation officers, but also more people from minority groups at the top, so the right changes can be made. They also wanted to see more people who had been on probation working for them. People wanted probation to be engaging and relevant to communities they serve. Again, this is such a disaster of integration. This is what results when you do not integrate communities. You have all these different people who will, and communities that will effectively try and do their best to, whether these are truths or lies, I don't know, but they will try and advantage their own communities within the entire system. And what does it end up with? It ends up with sentencing guidelines that actively give us a two-tier justice system, and then we have left-wingers, politicians, media, pundits, what have you, trying to claim that it's all nonsense, there isn't a two-tier system. Well, there clearly is, and it's a result of a lack of integration. That is the core of the problem here. And luckily, that's a conversation that's being brought up more and more. Everyone wanted fair treatment, but obviously they wanted fair treatment by having an advantage, as they just stated. And understanding that starting positions may be different. Support needs to match that as part of the levelling up process. And so, because we live in a communist country, because starting positions are different, that means that processes must be different, which a lot of people simply do not agree with. You commit a crime, you should largely have the same sentence as anyone else who committed the same crime. Anyway, back to Ms. Mahmood. The Sentencing Council is entirely independent, and today's update guidelines do not represent my views or the views of this government. I will be writing to the Sentencing Council to register my displeasure and to recommend reversing this change to guidance. As someone who is from an ethnic minority background, I do not want to stand for any differential treatment before the law for anyone of any kind. There will never be a two-tier sentencing approach under my watch, which is hilarious. The two-tier here has stuck, and it has forced Labour to actually react to two-tier justice, which is incredibly good to see. And it's good to see that she wrote to the Sentencing Council. However, Jenrick then pops this bubble by saying, "I've read the minutes of the meeting where a two-tier sentencing regime was agreed. Your representative was present, no objections were minuted. This is on you in two-tier care." In other words, you are only reacting to people pointing out that there is a problem now. When the problem was bubbling up, you did nothing. It is also worth pointing out at this point, though, not that this is necessarily Robert Jenrick's fault, but these will be sentencing guidelines that, as Reform pointed out, were published in 2023 when the Tories were in charge. So, once again, a lot like the Chagos deal, this is a problem that the Tories had under their watch and did nothing to try and stop it. However, if you're going to take a white pill away, just make sure that you know that Labour are actually actively trying to move right. We have won the zeitgeist, at least on the two-tier justice front, which is very good news. However, I am going to finish off this video by going into a quick news article by the BBC. So after mentioning that Ms Murgoot has written to the Sentencing Council expressing her opposition to this two-tier justice sentencing guideline, the Sentencing Council, they can actually defy Murgoot. They're entirely entitled to do so, according to the BBC, and the Justice Secretary and Prime Minister will then face a dilemma. Either they rush through legislation to overrule the council, no doubt facing down outrage from the legal establishment and anti-discrimination campaigners, or they allow the guidelines to take effect, facing accusations from the Conservatives and Reform, which is all anyone cares about, that they are not willing to do everything possible to stop something that they themselves have described as two-tier, which is especially highly charged as the government regards that accusation as politically toxic and is desperate to repel any suggestions of two-tier justice, and even the Home Office have said that it is a far-right accusation. So, which is it now? Are Labour now far-right? Because, unironically, that is what I am hearing from some left-wingers. Because apparently living through quasi-socialism for decades isn't enough. But it's an aspect of the modern British system that is not talked about enough, despite the issues of it being plain everywhere. There are far too many independent government bodies that Parliament have absolutely no power over. Keir Starmer is now, hopefully anyway, Labour are now realising that all the issues they blame the Tories for, they are having to make similar, if not the same, decisions because power in Parliament is actually rather weak. I have absolutely no sympathy for, frankly, any of the two main parties because they've done absolutely nothing for the past 2 decades to do anything about it. In fact, they keep making it all worse. And now it keeps biting them in the backside. They always say, oh, we need to do something about it, but why would they want to do anything about it? Why wouldn't you want your tens of thousands of pounds of salary to effectively have the power to say, well, we can't actually do anything about it? Effectively, Liz Truss was completely right. We do have a quangocracy, and it needs to be completely destroyed. She went the complete wrong way about it. It's the type of thing that you have to be quite stealthy about, to be quite honest with you, because this establishment has power and it will fight you to keep that power. And as much as we keep hearing that woke is being put away by the Culture Secretary and Labour and all that, no, woke is very much still alive and well. And, you know, there was a tweet I saw the other day asking, when actually did we go past peak woke? I don't think we're actually past it. I don't think we're quite at the worst point of it yet, because ultimately the true believers are all still in power, and they're going to be desperate to try and keep that power, and they are going to get more woke as they do it. And I have absolutely no faith that Labour are going to actually do anything about it. As mentioned in the BBC article, they could pass an Act of Parliament that gives them a veto on this. You know, Acts of Parliament can be passed and read and what have you in like 3 days if they really wanted to. So we all know that there is an opportunity for them to get out. If they don't take it, as far as I'm concerned, they are in cahoots with the quangocracy and need to be voted out ASAP. But I think we've had enough of this doomerism for today, and I think I've covered everything I need to anyway, so with that, it's chill time. No Peloponnesian War stream next Monday, because Jack is not available yet again. We will finish it, I promise. Tuesday, it's Tosh News, going through the news stories of the past 2 weeks, and then on Saturday, it's Laughing at the Guardian, with some whamming, including my lefty brother, so if you've always been excited to see what his opinions are, and why he thinks Labour is still the better choice in the last election, then do come along to that. But for now, if you want to help out the channel, do subscribe, leave a like, leave a comment. Those are all quick and easy ways to show me support. But if you think I deserve a little bit more, you can always send a super chat, super thanks, or become a member. Those are more direct and incredibly useful ways to help out the channel, and I appreciate everyone who sends, well, money to me, donations to me. Right, with that, that's everything I had for you for today. Once again, thank you very much for watching, and until next time, goodbye.